John Wallace, Captain Jack Crawford, 1847–1917, known as the Poet Scout, was an American adventurer, educator, and author. Captain Jack was a master storyteller about the Wild West and is known in American history as one of the most popular performers in the late 19th century. His daring ride of 350 miles in 6 days to carry dispatches to Fort Laramie for the New York Herald, to tell the news of the great victory by General George Crook against the village of Chief American Horse at the Battle of Slim Buttes during the Great Sioux War of 1876–1877, made him a national celebrity. Early life. Crawford was born in Carndonagh, East Donegal, Ireland, on March 4, 1847. His parents were both born in Scotland. John Wallace's father, John A. Crawford, was banished from Scotland for making revolutionary speeches and fled to Ireland. Like many Scots-Irish of that time, the Crawfords moved and settled for a time in Ulster, in Northern Ireland. At age 14, Crawford emigrated to the United States from Northern Ireland, joining other members of his family who had preceded him to Minersville, Pennsylvania, the heart of the nation's anthracite coal region. In 1861, while his father marched away to war, young Crawford went to work in the mines to help support the family. At age 17, he enlisted in the 48th Pennsylvania Regiment Volunteers and saw heavy fighting during the last stages of the Civil War. He was wounded twice, once at Spotsylvania and again at Petersburg, just days before Lee's surrender at Appomattox. While convalescing from the first wound in a Philadelphia hospital, young Crawford learned to read and write under the tutelage of a Sister of Charity. He would later incorporate his wartime experiences into his stage presentations. At war's end, Crawford returned home and found a job in the coal mines at Centralia, Pennsylvania. He moved there with his parents, John A. and Susie Crawford. His father John A. became the town's tailor. The death of his mother 2 years later permanently influenced his life. On her deathbed, Susie Wallace Crawford exacted a promise from her son that as long as he lived he would never drink liquor. The senior Crawford's addiction to strong drink had caused the family to suffer. In fact, one of Jack Crawford's earliest recollections was kneeling by his mother's side praying God to save a wayward father and husband. Crawford kept this promise for the rest of his life, becoming one of the few teetotal scouts that ever worked for the U.S. Army. This deathbed scene likewise found its way into Captain Jack's lectures and essays, contributing to Crawford's reputation as a leading temperance advocate. While in Centralia in September 1869, Jack married a local school teacher, Anna Maria Stokes, of Numidia, north of Centralia. Jack was appointed postmaster of Girardville, Pennsylvania, and Jack and Anna Marie moved there. He was also an officer in the local miners' union. Together they had 5 children, including a girl who was named for Jack's friend William Buffalo Bill Cody. Her name was May Cody Crawford. Black Hills Rangers. In 1875, Jack headed west on the Black Hills Gold Rush. He would later claim that dime novels were among the influences that propelled him west. Jack spent the first 6 months of the nation's centennial year canvassing the gold camps as a correspondent for the Omaha Daily Bee. During these months, the residents of the mining settlement of Custer elected him to the town's first city council. In 1876, Custer City miners organized a 125-man militia known as the Black Hills Rangers. Jack was appointed as chief of scouts, a troubleshooting unit of about 12 experienced fighting men, to look for Indian signs and escort emigrants through dangerous canyons where Indians often waited in ambush. He probably became Captain Jack when he took command of his company. Journalist. In 1876, Jack spent the first 6 months of the nation's centennial year canvassing the gold camps as a correspondent for the Omaha Daily Bee. After George Armstrong Custer's death on the Little Bighorn, Crawford joined Brig General George Crook's command as a civilian scout with the 5th Cavalry on July 22, 1876. On July 24, 1876, Jack boarded a train for Cheyenne en route to Fort Laramie, and friends presented him with appropriate gifts: a new Winchester repeating rifle, cartridge belt, holster, hunting knife and sheath, and a buckskin suit. The management of the Omaha Daily Bee contributed liberally to his outfit and paid tribute to its intrepid correspondent with these words: "Captain Jack is a right good fellow, and we hope to see him distinguish himself alongside of his old friend Buffalo Bill. Jack has done some good in advancing the interests of the Black Hills, and it was on this account that his Omaha friends took occasion to give him a handsome testimonial of their appreciation of his labors." The Great Sioux War of 1876–1877. During the Great Sioux War of 1876, Crawford was civilian scout with the 5th Cavalry Regiment and war correspondent for the Omaha Bee with General George Crook's Yellowstone and Bighorn expedition. Captain Jack is credited with carrying dispatches on a highly perilous route of 400 miles alone to Fort Fetterman, and he took part in the Horsemeat March of 1876, one of the most grueling marches in American military history. Crawford played a significant role in the Battle of Slim Buttes, 1876, and made a daring ride of more than 300 miles in 6 days to carry dispatches of the victory to Fort Laramie for the New York Herald. One of his most famous exploits included delivering a bottle of whiskey to Buffalo Bill Cody, while on campaign. Cody wrote of the incident in an autobiography of Buffalo Bill. "On learning that I was with Crook, Crawford at once hunted me up, and gave me a letter from General Sheridan, announcing his appointment as a scout. He also informed me that he had brought me a present from General Jones, of Cheyenne." "What kind of a present?" I inquired, seeing no indication of any package about Jack. "A bottle of whiskey," he almost shouted. I clapped my hand over his mouth. News that whiskey was in the camp was likely to cause a raid. I will say in passing that I don't believe there is another scout in the West that would have brought a full bottle of whiskey 300 miles. Captain Jack joins General Crook's command. Captain Jack traveled for over 2 weeks, trying to catch up with General Crook's command. On July 24, 1876, Jack boarded a train for Cheyenne en route to Fort Laramie. When Crawford reached Cheyenne, he discovered that the 5th Cavalry had already left for Fort Laramie and was en route north to Fort Fetterman. On July 29, Jack arrived at Fort Fetterman and credited with carrying dispatches on a highly perilous route of 400 miles. On August 2, Jack left Fort Fetterman and finally reached Crook's command camped on Rosebud Creek in Montana on August 8, 1876. After a brief nap, Crawford located his friend Buffalo Bill, handed him some letters, and distributed other communications to officers and newspaper correspondents accompanying the expedition. He then turned over to Cody a present from a Mr. Jones, proprietor of the Jones House in Cheyenne. The gift was a bottle of sour mash whiskey, which Jack had carried unharmed on his perilous journey to the Rosebud. In wiring of this incident in his autobiography, published in 1879, Cody whimsically remarked, "Jack Crawford is the only man I have ever known that could have brought that bottle of whiskey through without accident befalling it, for he is one of the very few teetotal scouts I ever met." Indeed, Crawford made a good impression upon both officers and enlisted men, who considered his ride from Fetterman a plucky undertaking. "Our campfires were lively after Captain Jack joined us," recalled an officer. "He sang his songs, told his stories, recited his poems and kept his tireless jaw constantly wagging for our edification." Crook's Horsemeat March. Crook's horsemeat march marked the beginning of one of the most grueling marches in American military history. Crook's command consisted of about 2,200 men, 1,500 cavalry, 450 infantry, 240 Indian scouts, and a contingent of civilian employees, including 44 White Scouts and Packers. Crook's civilian scouts included Frank Gruard, Baptiste Big Bat Poirier, Baptiste Little Bat Garney, Captain Jack Crawford and Charles Buffalo Chips White. Although Captain Jack's yarns and rhymes would help to relieve the monotony of camp life, Buffalo Bill grew bored by the inactivity and left the expedition to continue his theatrical career in the East. According to one newspaper account, it was on Cody's recommendation that Colonel Wesley Merritt subsequently appointed Crawford to succeed Cody as Chief of Scouts of the 5th Cavalry Regiment. News of the defeat of General Custer at the Battle of the Little Bighorn on June 25 and 26, 1876, arrived in the East as the U.S. was observing its centennial. The American public was in dismay and calls to punish the Sioux and awaited the government's response. War correspondents with national newspapers fought alongside General Crook and reported the campaign by telegraph. Correspondents embedded with Crook were Robert E. Strayhorn for the New York Times, Chicago Tribune, and the Rocky Mountain News, John F. Finnerty for the Chicago Times, Reuben Briggs Davenport for New York Herald and Joe Wasson for the New York Tribune and Alta California, San Francisco. On August 26, 1876, with his men rationed for 15 days, a determined General Crook departed from the Powder River and headed east toward the Little Missouri pursuing the Indians. Crook feared that Indians would scatter to seek game rather than meet the soldiers in combat after the fight with Custer. All other commanders had withdrawn from pursuit, but Crook resolved to teach the Indians a lesson. He meant to show that neither distance, bad weather, the loss of horses not the absence of rations could deter the U.S. Army from following up its wild enemies to the bitter end. Strayhorn reported that all the infantrymen who could ride and who so wished were mounted on mules from the pack train. No circus ever furnished a better show in its mule riding department than we enjoyed when those 200 infantrymen essayed their first mount. Many of them had never been astride a horse and many of the mules had never been ridden. Tom Moore, chief of pack trains, and his battalion of assistants, had the time of their lives trying to mount and hold the men in their saddles for the first hours of the performance. Not a few of the soldiers, after being pitched into the sagebrush and cactus a few times, contended they would sooner walk. However, galled but gallant, nearly 200 stuck to the mules. An accident befell Strayhorn during the advance. During a rainstorm, Strayhorn became entangled in his gear and his horse bucked, dragging him face first through prickly pear and cactus. With the help of surgeons, it took weeks to painfully extract the barbs. He remarked, "I was in good mood for an Indian fight or any other distracting adventure." The days soon arrived when, on forced marches after the enemy, all discharges of firearms except at the enemy were strictly prohibited under severe penalty. Being out on the right flank one day, just out of sight of the troops, I came upon a beautiful covey of grouse. They were so tame I could almost knock them over with rocks, but while the contact thus established made me increasingly anxious for grouse for dinner that night, I could not hit them. So finally, in spite of those orders and with growing appetite, I shot 2 of them and quickly secreted the evidence of my disobedience by rolling them up in the raincoat I carried on my saddle. The right wing of the command was wildly excited by the shots. The skirmishers thrown out on that side soon discovered my lonely presence and hustled me to Colonel Chambers with the news that no Indians were visible. He very sternly asked, "Mr. Strayhorn, did you do that firing?" Upon my answering, "Yes, sir," he still more gruffly asked, "At Indians, or what?" "Not at Indians, Colonel, but at grouse," I answered. I was so hungry for grouse that I just couldn't help it, so I'm ready to pay the penalty." "What is it?" Be it remembered that I was in the colonel's mess, and he replied quietly on the side, "Well, it will make a damn sight of difference whether you got a grouse." Crook soon began running short of food and supplies and ordered his men to go on half rations. Many of the men were forced to subsist on horse meat and was thereafter known as General Crook's Horse Meat March. Without grain and adequate forage, horses and mules had weakened and many collapsed in the steady rain and mud. Crook had already given orders to shoot abandoned animals for food, and for several days his saddened, ragtag army would exist on a diet of mule and horse meat. The horses commenced to play out. As fast as the poor brutes fell, the quartermaster had them killed and issued as rations, so the soldiers had nothing but played out horses to eat from there on into the hills. It looked funny to see a soldier ride his horse until it dropped exhausted, and then get off and shoot it and cut up its carcass up and issue meat to the soldiers of different companies. General Crook would not take any advantage of his command. If they starved, he starved with them. But the soldiers were nearing total exhaustion, wet, hungry, disheartened by constant hardships. One officer wrote that he saw men who were very plucky sit down and cry like children because they could not hold out. Years later, Colonel Andrew S. Burt reminisced with Crawford about the hardships they had shared on this grueling march: hunger, marching in the rain, sleeping on wet, muddy ground, eating horse meat. He vividly recalled Jack squatting on the ground before a campfire, gnawing at a horse's rib flesh from the coals and glad to get the rib. Captain Mills's assault at Slim Buttes. Chief American Horses Village. On September 7, 1876, General Crook ordered Captain Anson Mills to take 150 troopers, riding upon the command's best horses, to the northernmost mining camps in the Black Hills to obtain food and supplies for his starving troops and hurry back. Accompanying Mills's command were civilian scouts Gruard and Crawford, and newspaper correspondents Strayhorn and Davenport. Lieutenant John W. Bubb, the expedition commissary, had charge of 16 packers and 61 pack mules. Mills's command left camp that same evening in a thick mist, guided by Gruard, Crook's chief scout. About 1 a.m. the command stopped to rest, then moved on at daylight. On the afternoon of September 8, 1876, Gruard and Crawford were ranging a mile or more in advance of Mills, and Gruard spied Indian hunters and ponies piled high with game. Further investigation revealed the presence of Oglala Lakota Chief American Horses village of Oglalas, Minneconjous, Brules, and Cheyennes, numbering 37 lodges and about 260 people, of whom 40 to 100 were warriors. The village lay compactly in a broad depression of ravines encircled by the spires of Slim Buttes, limestone and clay summits capped with pine trees near present-day Riva, South Dakota. Gruard and Crawford also found about 400 ponies grazing near the village. Teepees were clustered about the various ravines and streams that crisscrossed the natural amphitheater, and smoke from the teepee fires hanging low beneath the misty clouds obscured the lodges. The village slept soundly in the cold rain. Battle plan. After learning of the village, Captain Mills sent Gruard on reconnaissance mission. Disguised as an Indian, Gruard went through the village looking for the best point to attack. After consulting his officers and scouts, Mills decided to conduct an assault. Captain Mills' battle plan was the classic dawn attack in U.S. Army and Indian warfare. The goal was to surround the enemy, stampede and capture their stock, and kill many of the warriors as possible. On the evening of September 8, 1876, Captain Mills split his men into 4 groups to attack the village. 25 were to remain hidden in a ravine a mile or so back, holding the horses and pack train. Lieutenant Frederick Schwatka would lead 25 mounted soldiers in a cavalry charge through the clustered lodges and stampede the Indians and their pony herd, all hands yelling and firing with revolvers to add to the confusion. 100 dismounted cavalrymen split in two groups would surround the village as nearly as possible, shoot the stampeded warriors as they emerged from their teepees and capture the ponies. Lieutenant Emmett Crawford was ordered to post his 57 troopers in skirmish order north and east of the camp, and Lieutenant Adolphus von Leutwitz moved his 53 troopers east and south of the village. Both groups would open fire on the lodges and close in on foot once Schwatka's cavalry had routed the ponies and cleared the village area. On the night before the assault, Strayhorn did not even attempt to sleep. Throughout the night he and others alternatively sat and stood, holding their horses in the cold rain and mist. Never before or since, he wrote in later years, were hours so laggard or anxiety so great for the coming of dawn when we could do something that would heat the blood and cheer the soul to the forgetfulness of that everlasting soaking patter of freezing rain. However, before the full plan could be carried out, troopers startled the Indian pony herd and they stampeded through the village neighing the alarm to Indians, who cut their way out of teepees for an escape to the hills. Since all chance for a total surprise was lost, Mills ordered the immediate charge with Schwatka and his 25 men. Schwatka, joined by Gruard, Captain Jack, and Strayhorn thereupon charged and followed the ponies into the village firing pistols into the lodges. Immediately, the dismounted detachments closed on the south side and commenced firing on the Indians. The fleeing warriors managed to unleash one or two volleys at the soldiers, and Lieutenant van Leutwitz fell almost immediately, a bullet shattering his right kneecap as he stood on the knoll next to Mills. Instantly Captain Jack rushed over, tearing off the neckerchief he wore and fashioning a tourniquet about van Leutwitz's wounded leg to check the flow of blood. Taken by surprise the Indians fled. Strayhorn recalled, as usual, I could not be denied the thrill of the charge by the gallant 25, and I'm sure that everything worked out as planned, except that many of the Indians escaped into a thicket in the bottom of a narrow gulch running along within a few yards of the nearest teepee, while a few others got away into the hills. The Indians, finding themselves laced in their lodges, the leather drawn tight as a drum in the heavy rain, quickly cut themselves out with their knives and returned fire. Many were seen to fall, and even in the approaching daylight it was often tell whether the burdens carried were children or the slain and wounded. The squaws carried the dead, wounded and children up the opposite bluffs, leaving everything but their limited nightclothes in our possession. Most of the Indians fled splashing through the swollen creek and scrabbling into the heavy underbrush south of the stream bed and up the adjacent bluffs, taking advantage of Mills' failure to secure an effective cordon southwest of the teepees. Entering the village. After the Indians withdrew, Strayhorn, Captain Jack and about 14 volunteers, mostly packers, entered the deserted village to survey its contents. A mule pack was taken along to secure dried meat found hanging from poles. Immediately, the mule was killed by a shot and the men fired upon from Indians concealed in the bluffs. Drawing crossfire, the men quickly jumped into the bed of a dry ravine. Meanwhile, Captain Mills waited for a time, slowly entered the camp, and troopers were sent in groups through the village to check teepees and collect stores. The picture we quickly presented in our movements around the battlefield with the skirmishing still in progress, rifles in one hand and ravenously chewing at a great hunk of dried meat in the other, provoked much fun, and, with blessed momentary sunshine, a general forgetfulness of past troubles. Chief American Horse's camp was a rich prize. The lodges were full of furs and meat, and it seemed to be a very rich village. Crook seized and destroyed food, seized 300 or 400 ponies, arms and ammunition, furs and blankets. In a dispatch written for the Omaha Daily Bee, Crawford described the cornucopia he encountered, teepees full of dried meats, skins, beadwork, and all that an Indian's head could wish for. The troopers also captured about 300 fine ponies to partly replace their dead horses. Of significance, troopers recovered items from the Battle of Little Bighorn, including a 7th Cavalry Regiment guidon from Company I, fastened to the lodge of Chief American Horse and the bloody gauntlets of slain Captain Miles Kia. One of the largest of the lodges, called by Gruard the Brave Knight Hearts, supposedly occupied by the guard, contained 30 saddles and equipment. One man found $11,000 in one of the teepees. Others found 3 7th Cavalry horses, letters written to and by 7th Cavalry personnel, officers' clothing, a large amount of cash, jewelry, government-issued guns and ammunition. Messengers to Crook. Promptly upon taking the village, Captain Mills sent 2 bareback riders to tell General Crook that he had a village and was trying to hold and needed assistance. When Crook received word from Mills's 3 messengers, he could scarcely contain his anger at Mills. Crook was primarily interested in feeding his men and ordered Mills to avoid a fight should he encounter a large village, and instead, cut around it and go into the Black Hills to get supplies. Crook also told Mills that he expected to bivouac his Ixchestead men and therefore Mills could not expect any immediate support. Crook's officers debated the propriety of Mills's attack on a hostile village of uncertain size, a controversy intensified by Custer's defeat under like circumstances. The question was especially provocative since Mills had opened the engagement with a small supply of ammunition. Strayhorn reported, Crook was very much disappointed because Mills didn't report his discovery last night, and there was plenty of time to have got the entire command there and so effectively surrounded the village that nothing would have escaped. But the general is also pleased, all things considered. Staff officers in telling the receipt of this news said Crook pushed the cavalry on with all possible haste, the infantry to follow more leisurely. But the tidings reaching Crook so electrified the immortal infantry that they forgot all about hunger, cold, wet and fatigue. Fortunately for Mills, Crook's column was not far behind. Crook assembled a relief contingent of about 250 men and 17 officers, plus Surgeons Bennett A. Clements and Valentine T. McGillicuddy. John Frederick Finnerty, war correspondent for the Chicago Times, joined the advance column. Despite the hardships of the horse-meat march, the troopers were excited by the prospects of a battle. Chief American Horse's defiance. At the onset of the stampede and cavalry charge, Chief American Horse with his family of 3 warriors and about 25 women and children retreated into one of the ravines that crisscrossed the village amongst the teepees. The winding dry gully was nearly 20 feet deep and ran some 200 yards back into a hillside. Trees and brush obstructed the view of the interior. We found that some of the Indians had got into a cave at one side of the village. One of the men started to go past that spot on the hill, and as he passed the place he and his horse were both shot. This cave or dugout was down in the bed of a dry creek. The Indian children had been playing there, and dug quite a hole in the bank, so that it made more of a cave than anything else, large enough to hold a number of people. Troopers were alerted about the ravine when Private John Wenzel, Company A, 3rd Cavalry, became the first Army fatality at Slim Buttes when he ill-advisedly approached the ravine from the front and a Sioux bullet slammed into his forehead. Wenzel's horse was also shot and killed. An attempt was made to dislodge the Indians and several troopers were wounded. Gruard and Big Bat Poirier crept close enough to the banks of the ravine to parley with the concealed Indians in endeavors to get them to surrender. But the savages were so confident of succor from Crazy Horse and his much larger force, who were encamped only a dozen miles to the west, and to whom they had sent runners early in the morning, that they were defiant to the last. These Indians felt no urgent need to surrender, for they defiantly yelled over to the soldiers more Sioux camps were at hand and their warriors would soon come to free them. Chief American Horse, anticipating relief from other villages, constructed a dirt breastworks in front of the cave and geared for a stout defense. Indians regroup. Mills and Gruard soon realized a mistake had been made. Indians were firing back and the command was surrounded. After the firefight with Chief American Horse at the ravine, Mills sent yet another messenger, the third, to Crook. Mills decided against further efforts to expel the Indians, and his men dug entrenchments facing the ravine. As soon as the warriors had their squaws and children in security, they returned to the contest and soon encompassed Mills's with a skirmish line, whose command was engaged with the wounded and the held ponies. The Indians made several abortive rushes to recapture their ponies, and Strahorn reported that a number of the most gallant dashes were made at them by Lieutenant Crawford at the head of 10 or 12 cavalry. Observing warriors riding back and forth through the gaps in the buttes, Mills grew worried that there was another village nearby and that Crook may not arrive in time. Captain Mills gave the order to retreat, but Captain Jack told him that a retreat was impossible. Not anticipating an Indian fight, Mills had allowed his men only 50 rounds of ammunition each, and he would wait for General Crook's personal attention to Chief American Horse. General Crook arrives. General Crook's relief column endured a forced march of 20 miles in about 4.5 hours to reach the village and arrived at Slim Buttes at 11:30 a.m. on September 9. The whole cheering command entered the valley, and the village teemed with activity like an anthill which had just been stirred up. Crook immediately established his headquarters and set up a field hospital in one of the Indian lodges. Crook inventoried the camp and the booty. The camp held 37 lodges. A 3 or 4-year-old girl was discovered, but no bodies were found. Over 5,000 pounds of dried meat was found and was a godsend for the starved troopers. Troopers separated the stores to be saved from the greater number to be destroyed, and the remaining teepees were pulled down. The ravine at Slim Buttes. Crook soon turned his efforts to dislodging Chief American Horse and his family in the ravine. The defenders had already killed Private John Wenzel, wounded others, and threatened all that approached. The deaths and injuries of their comrades inflamed the soldiers who were already distraught from their ordeal. Trees and brush obstructed the view of the interior of the winding dry gully, and the narrowness kept the soldiers from firing accurately. Some of the scouts and packers joined in an informal attempt to rouse the Indians but met with unexpected firepower and fell back in surprise. Crook then deployed troops below the mouth of the ravine, crawling on their bellies, firing at random into the hidden ravine without evident harm to the warriors. Before long a multitude of soldiers had gathered near the cave-like mouth of the ditch, somewhat protected from gunfire by sharp embankment. Officers and men joined sending a fusillade into its black depths, and suddenly they received a veritable volley in response that sent them reeling and stumbling away. Then, on Crook's orders, First Lieutenant William Philo Clark led a group of 20 volunteers forth, but the Indians sent forth such overwhelming volleys that the troops scampered for safety. Some of the men crept forward with flaming sticks which they tossed into the ditch without apparent effect. By now hundreds of idlers had gathered in the vicinity of the ravine and they complicated the efforts. It was a wonder to me, recalled Major John G. Bork, that the shots of the beleaguered did not kill them by the half-dozen. Charles Buffalo Chips White. Crook's scouts positioned themselves on the opposite side of the ravine just above the cave. The bank of the ravine was probably 8 to 10 feet high, and the scouts could converse with the Indians below without the danger of getting shot. After Lieutenant Clark's unsuccessful assault, Scout Charles Buffalo Chips White attempted to get a shot in the cave and was immediately killed by the defenders. Frank Gruard witnessed the incident. Buffalo Chips was standing opposite me. He was one of those long-haired scouts, and claimed to be a partner of Buffalo Bill's. He thought it was a good place to make name for himself, I suppose, for he told Big Bat that he was going to have one of the Indians' scalps. He had no more than got th.
Please subscribe and thanks for watching.